and thank you for holding this hearing, and appreciate the witnesses' focus on this really important issue, but it's a very difficult issue. I know I'm not going to ask Senator Cortez Masto another question, but as her line of questioning, I think, was actually really important with regard to state-federal cooperation. And 2 years ago, in the Victims of Trafficking Act, we were able to include an amendment that really forced the federal government to be more forthcoming on cooperating with state AGs and local district attorneys in prosecuting Mann Act violations. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the Mann Act. That's the federal law that prevents essentially trafficking of, young people across state lines. But it's hard to bring it in action as a state AG, even though you have all talked about the lack of resources. So this was a part of this bill. And we'd like to work with all of you to get the word out more that state AGs, district attorneys actually have a lot more authority under the new law that we passed 2 years ago to prosecute Mann Act cases, even though it's a federal crime. And this is something that I think a lot of us could do a better job of highlighting to make sure our state AGs and district attorneys know that we have those resources now. And we'd love to work with you on getting the word out, because I think it's a great way to go after some of these crimes and spread the resources when, as you've testified, we're all kind of hurting on the resources. So would look forward to working with all of you on that. Let me ask another question. It's really a follow-on from Senator Capito's question. When you talk about vulnerable populations, she mentioned rural victims, and I'm very interested in that, being from Alaska, but also homeless victims and homeless youth. My wife works at Covenant House in Anchorage, and you may be familiar, and I'd like to submit them for the record, Mr. Chairman, a study, a 10-city study by Loyola University and Covenant House on labor and sex trafficking among homeless youth.
Without objection.
And this is just a recent New York Times article. Also, I'd like to submit for the record, homeless youth at high risk of human trafficking. And in Anchorage, 28% of homeless youth were victims of human trafficking, which was a shocking number for our community. A lot of people weren't aware of that. What are the things, and I'll just open this up to everybody, what are the things that we can do and we can focus on working with groups like yours to help address these populations, whether they're from rural states like West Virginia and Alaska, or whether it's the homeless youth problem that seem particularly vulnerable to human trafficking? What are the things that we should be trying to do here, working with you or working with states like we've been talking about earlier? Yeah, I'll open that up to all of you.
Thank you for the question. Your wife works at Covenant House. What a wonderful institution with great research in the last few years also. So
yeah, they're great.
Hats off to her
very
work.
Very passionate.
Very wonderful. Homelessness is indeed one of the greatest drivers that we see. I'd love to run stats for you specifically, looking at minors and then looking at young adults so that we have some sort of data differentiation there, but I'd like to give that to you. I don't have that with me now. But it is certainly something that we see all of the time. It's either something that whether a parent is insecure and that makes the minor at risk, or if it's the minor themselves. We also see tremendous intersection with the community that identifies as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Yep. And when you combine those two things, we have deep concern. One of the policy areas that we think needs immediate attention is the reauthorization of the Runaway Homeless Youth and Trafficking Prevention Act that has been lingering for some time in front of Senate and on the House side. But it does provide the majority of resources for youth either at risk to homelessness or who are already homeless, including resources for counselors and other school staff who can provide guidance and assistance to the youth who are still attending school, as well as street outreach and other kinds of services. So I think we're looking ideally at how do we prevent that homelessness in the first place? Do we need to look at revamping the way that we deal with families? How do we keep them together? How do we provide resources to them so that they're not at risk of homelessness in the first place? But then once that's happened and that minor is still engaging with community resources, how do we keep them safe? So I think there's a couple of things, but RHY TPA, I would deeply advocate for its reauthorization.
Great. Anyone else on that topic?
In Orlando, we're also partnered with the Covenant House there. They've been a great partner in taking victims of human trafficking. The majority, Senator, of our victims are homeless. And so, as she had also stated, the LGBT community is super at risk. Most of them have...
Why is that? I mean, I know that was in some of the studies, but what makes them more at risk than other populations?
I believe part of it is there's no housing or shelter for boys or transgender. And so they repeatedly end up in forced pornography, these different sex rings. It starts a lot of times as survival sex because maybe they came out and were rejected by family or the community. And so this is definitely a problem, is the housing and shelter, as she had indicated, for these young people.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan.